Welcome to the June 2018 SCR Connections webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us for this exciting presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Sheila Zink, Advocacy Programs Manager at IBM. Sheila leads research and analysis for accessibility initiatives and collaborates with clients, partners, and universities to build new innovations supporting people of all ages and abilities. Her past studies include the 2016 Outthink Aging report, which examines how cognitive technologies can improve the lives of older adults. Without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Sheila and give her as much time as possible for this presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. And just to give you some context, as Brian mentioned, I work for IBM. I work in the IBM Research Organization and in the accessibility group. And we have a mission to look at technology and to look at opportunities to help make technology more easy to use and accessible for people of all ages and abilities. I specifically focus on older adults and looking at the older and the growing older adult population and how technology can be used and implemented in ways to make their lives better and more productive, and making sure that everybody has equal access to tools and technologies that will improve their lives. What I want to share with you this morning is the results of a study that we conducted last year. And looking at the older adult population, you probably have seen in actually the popular media a lot of information, a lot of reports about the growing problem of loneliness. And so we set out to look at this in more detail. And one of the reasons we were so concerned about loneliness as a trend is you look at the aging population. I don't think this is new news to many people, but the aging population is growing and increasing in terms of the overall percentage of the world population. This has been well known, I think, for a number of years, especially in Western industrialized countries like the United States, like many countries in the EU, as well as Japan. I think if you look at the numbers, though, across the world, you see this trend no matter where you are in the world. So the population in India, in China, in Africa, in Latin America, those numbers of older adults are also increasing at a very high percentage. So much so that if you look at projections by 2050, the thinking is that we're going to have a very significant portion, maybe 30% or more, over the 60. And we are really, I think, at a very unique point in history where this is the first time in the 21st century where we need to, as a society, look at how we build, really build the world, infrastructure, transportation, education, housing, commerce. Everything has been really focused up until this point about how do we build this world for the young. Because frankly, we didn't have a significant size of the population that was older. But now that we're entering into the century and looking at the demographics, we realize that we really need to be engaged and thinking about how do we create a world and support people that are living. Quite frankly, this next generation might live well into their 90s and possibly passing 100. So again, why study loneliness? And it really does tie to this idea that we now have, a very large cohort of people that can expect to live past 80. And people are living not only well past their 60s and 70s, they're living into their 80s and their 90s. And that age group is growing really at the fastest pace. However, when you look at, that age group, you see a really startling statistic that 43% of older adults report feeling lonely. And we feel that this is going to have a pervasive impact because if you look at loneliness, loneliness does have an impact not only just on your cognitive or your mental health, but also your physical health. And these health issues are going to have an impact on the healthcare, government, and other sectors that are already under a fair amount of stress and strain. So that's why IBM wants to study this issue, and it's kind of what it brought us to. And what we wanted to really focus on, and understanding this, is really get an understanding of what the issue was. First, understand what the impact, and the factors are around why older adults are finding themselves, socially disconnected. And to do that, if you have studied any aspect of the aging population, you know that there's a really wide variety of stakeholders here. We wanted to get a really comprehensive and 360 view of opinions and research and understandings of the area. So we initially targeted about 20 or so experts across universities, foundations, public policy, and health groups, government agencies, and businesses. And we quickly really found out that this is a very passionate and very collegial group. People that are studying this issue really want to share information, want to bring more people into looking at it in more depth. So we ended up speaking to well over 50 people. And we structured these interviews, again, in kind of, our outset was to look at what are the underlying causes of loneliness in this cohort? What separates older adults and why they're lonely versus why people are lonely at younger ages? We wanted to get an understanding of how it's being addressed today, because there are solutions in the market, but there are challenges to those solutions. And it's here kind of where we wanted to get a better understanding of what those challenges were, so that we could put together a set of recommendations to help build new solutions or make existing solutions more effective. And as we really dove into this issue, we were really presented with a very stark set of statistics. Loneliness has been shown to have a really devastating impact on not only your mental health, but your physical health. And with some researchers equating it to about the physical effect of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, leading it to people to think about it as a chronic condition as devastating as diabetes or cardiovascular disease. It has a dramatic increase in your risk of dementia, and an overall 6% increase in your mortality rate. It also has an impact not only at an individual level, but also on overall society and economic impact. If you look at the amount of services that are being provided to family members, to older adults, it really, that are unpaid, it comes into kind of a staggering $470 billion. There's already an enormous amount of spending on the older adult community from a medical perspective, and with loneliness exacerbating physical conditions as well as mental conditions, you look at a structure that's already under a strain that's going to even get more strained. And then if you look at kind of the amount of caregiving and effort that goes into taking care of people that are in this cohort, and the effect that it's having, particularly in what's called the sandwich generation, people that are probably in their 40s to 50s taking care of older adults, their parents, their family members, the effect that it's having on their own lives and their own jobs is affecting the economy to the tune of about $33 or $34 billion. So, it's clear that, it is having an enormous impact both at the individual and at the societal level. So as we started to look at what causes loneliness in older adults, throughout the interviews that we did, there was one that really struck me midway through the project. One of our subjects stated, loneliness in older adults almost always is initiated from some kind of loss. And that's different from loneliness in a younger cohort. That people that have experienced life and have formed social connections start to see those connections erode through a series of factors. Some are gradual and natural. Children grow up and they move away. Circle of friends, or your partner can shrink due to illness or death. But there are two other really significant factors that initiate loneliness that come on often very suddenly and very dramatically. And one is losing mobility, and losing the ability, either physical mobility, being able to easily walk or get around, but also losing the ability to drive. If you lose access to transportation, this immediately shrinks your world dramatically. And the other other one that I don't think people often think about is retirement. When people retire, it really, people don't, or underestimate really, how much of their social interaction, how much of their personal identity, and their interactions really rest with their workplace. And when people retire, it's often a shock, and those aren't easy connections to replace. The other thing that really has a factor too, especially in this culture, in the United States and in some other Western cultures, is that there's significant aging stereotypes. There's ageism that perpetuates this idea that older adults are dependent, they're not contributing. People look at the popular media and frankly, they don't see themselves. They don't see themselves as they see themselves, as healthy, active people that want to contribute to society. What they often portray are people that are infirm or are, having significant medical or physical impacts. And this kind of just erodes at a sense of self-worth. It erodes at your identity, and it really kind of, people start to shut down if they don't see themselves kind of embraced in the popular culture or society. There are a lot of solutions, though. People are aware of this issue and they are looking for solutions. They are implementing solutions, but there are some challenges. Even the most effective solutions that we talk to people about, there are some common things that come up over and over again in terms of what limits the solution and how effective it can be. And the first is loneliness can be very difficult to detect. There's no effective or commonly approved screening for loneliness as there now is for depression. So, when we think about kind of identifying loneliness within, let's say, the context of a primary care relationship, it doesn't come up. It's not a topic of conversation. We don't have a good, common, standard way to measure it. It often hides in plain sight, so to speak, and it can be masked by other conditions like depression or poverty, quite frankly. There's also, especially in this culture and in Northern Europe, there's a real stigma attached to reaching out for social support. People prize independence. They prize kind of a certain stoicism, and they're very reluctant to kind of self-identify and say, I am having these issues. I am feeling very lonely and wanting to reach out. The other thing that's, on the societal aspect of it, we found actually a lot of great examples of solutions that were working well, but they were very, very small. And they tended to be contained to, let's say, one industry or one agency or one particular silo. And as I've mentioned, working with older adults, usually to be successful, you have to involve a lot of different stakeholders. We found solutions that we looked at were kind of very fragmented, and that was a source of frustration. People, really recognized the fact that they were working on a small scale and they wanted to get bigger, or they wanted to do a more effective job of networking, let's say, bringing in agency partners or bringing in business partners, but they felt stuck. And that there was no easy way to connect people, either at kind of a personal level or at a system level. Systems tended to run in very disparate, isolated ways, and it wasn't easy to bring that together. And from a technology perspective, those solutions that we're using, some elements of technology, there is a real fallacy out there in the marketplace that is older adults won't use technology, and they're reluctant to really embrace it, and that's just not true. Older adults will use technologies, but there are a certain amount of parameters that have to be in place for that solution to be successful. So as we interviewed and looked at a number of different organizations that were tackling this problem, and I'm going to talk to you about a couple of examples, we found some factors that were really common across all of them. The ones that were successful had these things in common with each other, especially if they were using technology. And this is that the technology has to be easy to access. It has to be personalized and relevant to the individual. With those two things in place, there was almost no hurdle. But the other thing that was really important was that the solution had to be very community specific. There's a lot of discussion around keeping older adults safe and independent in their homes, and that's really important work. But when it comes to loneliness and social connection, the focus here is people want to stay safe in their homes, but more importantly, they want to stay in their communities. And whatever interventions that are successful really focus on what is meaningful to that individual in their own community and what makes that community really home to them. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions. And Sarah, is there anything in the chat?
Nope, there's no questions right now in the chat. If anyone does have questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box.
Okay. What I'd like to do next is spend some time taking you through some examples of companies that do have, and agencies that do have solutions in the market that are working with older adults quite successfully in helping to help them mitigate loneliness and achieve greater social connection. And I'm going to start with one that's based here where I'm located in the Boston area called Rendeavor. And what Rendeavor is, it's a small startup company. They won an MIT challenge a couple of years ago. And what they do is that they offer virtual reality experiences to residents of assisted living and retirement communities in the Boston area. And when I first heard about this, quite frankly, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. But their whole business model really is focused on creating virtual reality experiences targeting older adult markets. And they really focus on a couple of areas. One is that they look at creating experiences that are meaningful to an individual. So they will work with a retirement community and their members to say, would you like to see your old neighborhood, or would you like to see or share, a place that you spent your childhood. But they also do things like they'll go to the Boston Symphony and they'll record concerts. They will also look and do whitewater rafting or mountain climbing or different other types of experiences where it may be of interest to people who don't have the physical mobility at this point to take them on, but they still want to experience and have that experience. So what they found in doing this is the experiences themselves, the virtual reality was not just an opportunity for an individual to experience something else, but it was an opportunity for a group of individuals to share an experience. And one of the challenges as people move into retirement communities, they often are coming from different parts of the country. They often might be coming from different parts of even their home communities. So it's a new environment. And people, older adults, kind of lose the facilities to making new social connections. Because frankly, in a lot of cases, we make social connections based on shared experiences like a job or our children in school or something that is going on within our community. When you move to a new community, and if you don't have kind of this heritage of shared experiences, it can be difficult to form new friendships. So what the virtual reality experience did for them was it was something that they could participate in together, so to speak, and try new equipment and try new experiences. And then after it was over, what the directors of the community found was that people, it was truly an icebreaker. If they had shared a concert together, or if they had gone on a neighborhood walk in part of Boston, they had something now that they could communicate about, and it really helped foster more connections at dinner. People kind of congregating in different ways, and it really helped people kind of overcome that barrier of like, how do I get talking to somebody else? It gave them something in common, literally. Another group that we work with quite extensively, the Front Porch organization, is out in California, and they have a network of retirement communities and assisted living communities, and they also run really what is a research center for new technologies and how new technologies can be embedded into the communities and adopted successfully. And one of the pilot projects that they did a couple of years ago, they initiated a project around Alexa. And one of the things that they have found in introducing technology to older adults is that the greatest success comes with the highest degree of personalization. So before they even roll the devices out into their communities, they started by asking people what kind of music they liked. What kind of channels do they listen to? Do they like CNN or do they like Fox or SCR? And they built up a profile. And they customized each of the devices to that individual's profile so that when they put the device into the home, it was already set up in a way that would engage that individual. And they also, I think, do a really good job of looking up how people use technology and kind of keep their assumptions out of it. And what they found with the Alexa and the Echo Pilot was how many innovative ideas people had. They didn't first view the device as a safety device, but they found what people were using was using the Echo to turn on lights at night when they got up. And this helped reduce the number of falls people were having in the community. And they found the engagement with the technology was really, really strong, so much so that, again, from social connection, they were so, the adoption level was so strong that residents started their own fund to buy more Echo devices, and for people that might not have the means to do it on their own. And so they've created kind of this is self-initiated, they are now running Alexa groups. They are now running kind of their own outreach and implementation program without the, assistance really from porch. This is all self-directed. But they wanted everybody in the community to experience this, and now, it's become kind of a way to get people involved, get to know each other, and know that they've got kind of a caring group of people that want to stay connected. When you think of the city of Austin, I think Austin has a reputation of being kind of a young, hip, innovative, growing city. And it is all of that, but it's also a city that is experiencing a huge boom in the population of older adults. And they're predicting that 30% of the residents are going to be over the age of 55 based on the 2010 census. And when those numbers came to light, the city of Austin did a very, very proactive thing. They formed what's called Austin Up, which is a public-private partnership with both the city as well as a network of local businesses, as well as the University of Texas and the surrounding healthcare agencies and hospitals in the region. And they are running a number of different projects, kind of running the gamut of transportation, housing, as well as medical support. But one of the things that was really, really, I think, innovative and what they did early on was understand that people that were of retirement age were often not wanting to totally exit out of the workforce for a variety of reasons. Some might be financial, but a lot had to do with the fact that their work was part of their identity. Their work was part of their social life. And so what Austin Up has done has made a real investment in connecting local businesses together to create these job fairs. And some of the job fairs are around volunteer opportunities, but many of the job fairs are around paying opportunities. And it's, I think, a very creative way to get those businesses thinking differently about their workforce and how they could integrate older adults into their workforce population as a way of, partnering with the city to help people to network and to find new opportunities. It's been one of the most successful efforts that they've done. And the number of fairs that they're holding just keeps growing and growing every year. Another solution, and this has to do with kind of more just checking in on people, making sure that people are not becoming socially and physically isolated, I think is really innovative, and it takes advantage of an already existing infrastructure. It's called Call and Check. It was initiated in the Isle of Jersey over in Europe, where postal workers and people obviously that are calling on people every day to deliver mail took on a new role to kind of call and literally check in on people, at designated times and see how they were doing. If they had a short questionnaire And it was a way for them to kind of first, if they hadn't had an interaction with somebody, making sure that they at least were talking to somebody on a routine basis, and the way the agencies and the municipality there to really kind of keep tabs and keep check on people and get in early to alert either caregivers or family or other agencies if they suspect that there might be an issue, either medical, physical, mental, and get individuals the help and assistance that they might need. I think one of the things that was really significant about this solution, and that is going to be significant about any solutions that are effective, is that in order to reach this growing older adult population, we really need to think creatively about the partnerships that we form. And we need to look at organizations that have kind of that pervasive reach and that pervasive touch to individuals, together with trust. And trust is very important. That it's one thing to have kind of an army of people that could reach a large number of population. It's another thing to think about the level of trust somebody might have. And they have found with this solution that it's a very effective way to utilize already existing infrastructure to do more and to help keep people engaged. And then finally, wanted to share with you some work that's being done around transportation. And a project that we kicked off about a year and a half ago, at the beginning of 2017, IBM, Local Motors, and the CTA Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the CES event, started a project around accessible transportation. Local Motors is a company that produces a self-driving autonomous vehicle that's powered by IBM Watson that is 3D printed. So they are creating kind of this light manufacturing, quick to produce, easy to adapt, or easy to implement design change vehicle that is designed to be, kind of a limited transport, small distance solution to help people get from, point A to point B. We are working together with them, IBM, to make this vehicle the most accessible vehicle that we can, so that anybody with any level of disability or age can have access to transportation in a way that's personalized and supportive to them, that helps keep them connected, gives them opportunities to stay connected to their community. One of the things that when we were looking at this project, and we worked with From Port and we worked with ARP to interview older adults about their transport needs. And, I mentioned earlier that loss of transportation is one of the most critical factors in initiating loneliness. If you can't get out to do your shopping or to visit people or to go into your own medical appointments or to go out to dinner, your life just contracts. So transportation, if we could provide better transportation to older adults in a way that's personalized, in a way that is under kind of their control, their lives will, just open up. So we interviewed, like I said, probably 15 different retirement communities, older adults, in different focus groups and workshops, and we brought those requirements back to Local Motors. And earlier this year at the CES event, we debuted the prototype of accessible Ollie, and really got a very, very strong reaction. And we're looking to finish up those requirements and have it in production in 2019. So with that, I'm going to stop again and see if there's any questions about any of the case studies or companies.
Hi, Sheila. This is Brian. I really like a lot of the examples that you've shown. Even just this most recent one just makes me think about how, at least older adults in my family, Lyft and, we have services already like Lyft and Uber that already have provided better independence for them, for older members in my family who can't drive. But my question is sort of two parts. It's related to the earlier research you presented on, feelings of loneliness, we've also seen that there's also been a lot more in the news about younger adults also feeling lonely, yet they have this technology already available to them. And I'm wondering if you feel that, sort of the way innovations in technology for older adults today are going to be responsive to younger generations as they get older and enter into that retirement age. And then sort of the second part is wondering if your research has revealed if that stigma of talking about loneliness is decreasing at all with people who are just at the cusp.
I'll kind of answer the first one. I think there's significant differences between loneliness in younger adults and loneliness in older adults. And I will say I am no expert, nor have I studied, the younger cohort in any depth. But just kind of on a surface level, I think to some degree, there's discussion about how technology has kind of isolated younger adults from each other. Conversely, as we look at technology, to kind of have the opposite effect. Can technology be used to help bring older adults together? And I think Carrie Olson, who's the director at Front Porch, said it really, really well with their study of technology in older adults, which is it has really nothing to do about the technology. The technology is there really to serve as an enabler. And what that technology has to do is create a moment of connection. And if it's not creating that moment of connection, then it's not helping, so to speak. And I think one of the great examples is the Alexa and the Echo. You wouldn't think of the Echo, I think, as a social tool necessarily. What happened was that it was something, again, that they all got excited about and wanted to bring and kind of network with the people in their community and to form kind of the Alexa club. And so the Alexa turned out to be something exciting that they had in common with each other that formed kind of this ability to go out and to engage with each other as individuals, face-to-face. So, I think as we look at technology in older adults in the solutions, it's more about how do we facilitate those moments of connection. And to bring it to Ollie, that's literally how do we get people out of their room to another place where they want to be in the easiest possible fashion. And I apologize, Brian, remind me of the second part of your question.
So the second part of my question was kind of separate. I was just interested, you talked about sort of the stigma of talking about loneliness in older adults. And I was wondering if any of your research has revealed, at least with sort of the younger cohort of older adults, if that stigma is changing at all.
I think, yeah, one of the challenges that we spoke to everybody that was in the medical community or as a psychologist treating people in this area, one of the frustrations was the lack of a standard screening. So even if we wanted to talk about it in a caregiving setting, their frustration was that we did not have anything, there wasn't anything adopted by, let's say, the AMA or the medical community as a way to kind of, truly and accurately and share, with some degree of certainty that this person is experiencing loneliness. So I think that's one of the issues that needs to be addressed, from a caregiving, primary caregiving point of view. The second part of that is you now have the means to assess it, is how do you then get people to open up about it? And my sense, and again, I haven't studied younger generations, I still think there is somewhat of a divide with people, particularly people that are maybe 70 and older. The baby boomers that are coming through a little bit later will probably be more open and quite frankly demanding of their caregivers and wanting to tackle this. But I think there's a concern that people, let's say 70 and older, are still very reluctant to, there's a stigma with mental illness. There's a stigma with, feeling sad and isolated, and that, this is somehow my fault, or I shouldn't complain. I guess it's more of the I shouldn't complain piece of it. That I think still is an issue for this particular cohort, separate from the younger generation.
Great, thank you.
And Sheila, we did have another question coming through the chat box. Someone who's worked in an NORC program and found male elders struggled with connecting to others in a senior center, and they're wondering if there are any current programs or potential programs that would help engage both men and women in senior programs, especially in creative arts, virtual reality science, and college courses.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's actually a program that's going on in the UK right now called the Mensheds, and it really kind of gets to this issue, which is that men in particular are not, not stereotyped, but in general, are reluctant to ask for help. And also, in that generation, probably were not the ones that were the caregivers of, or the nurturers of the social connections. I think it's a fair statement to say that women tend to do more of the family work in terms of keeping the couple's social life. And also, people that are then without a partner, lack that as well. So what they started and what they realized was that, just getting men together for like, let's have a chat, or, let's get together for lunch or coffee, that wasn't going over very well in, some very well-meaning programs and retirement communities. So what they did, and it really wasn't billed as, a loneliness outreach program. It was literally just something where men could come and work on projects. And they tended to be projects that were in support of the local community. So let's say building a new center, or working in conjunction with a school to help tutor or engage with kids, let's say around woodshop projects. But what they found is that if men had something very tangible to do, that had an outcome that often involved some of their expertise or kind of working with their hands, where it was more just doing something versus talking about something, they had a lot more success. And again, they did not build this as an intervention or a social connection program, but as the men came together to work on shared projects, social connections started to form.
Great, thank you so much for that, Sheila. We do have a couple more questions, but did you want to go ahead and finish your slides and hold those questions for the end, or did you want to answer them now? Okay.
Yeah, let's go through the next couple. So as we looked at several solutions that are experiencing, a really good degree of success, but there were many comments and feedback about how we could, make these solutions better and more available and more effective. And as we look at any solution going forward, there are really three key components, and that is, we have to treat the underlying cause, which is loss. Again, loneliness can be different depending on your age group, but with older adults, it really does center around loss. Loss of transportation, loss of mobility, loss of job, social connection, loss of family. And like other illnesses like diabetes and heart disease, it's better to kind of get in there early and just start with identification and preventative action versus trying to, work the problem on the other end. So to prevent loss and keep older adults connected and engaged, we need to rethink a lot of different aspects of our society, from employment, education to transportation, housing. One that was really kind of mentioned by everybody that we worked with is researchers, advocacy groups, public health workers. They need better tools to aggregate and mine data. The city of Boston, which I've talked about, they did a fantastic job looking at their 2010 census. That took them 2.5 years. So if we had a better way of looking at census data, for example, and more quickly identify where there might be these growing populations or where there might be populations in need, we could get in there earlier with intervention. And we need to think about how we can develop solutions that give older adults the tools to support and build and enhance their social capital. And the way that we really came to think about this is that people, are focused on their financial assets and maintaining those into, retirement. And we need to start thinking about how do you nurture and maintain and grow your social assets in the same way. with the same diligence. The best solutions, again, this came up over and over again. There isn't one organization or industry that's going to own this. You know, there's no silver bullet here. And in fact, if a solution stays isolated, let's say within a government agency or within you know, the medical community, it's just not going to be as effective. But there's a real opportunity and a need here across multiple industries: utilities, telecommunications, electronics, healthcare, education. You know, multiple stakeholders need to be involved. The things that are going to make them successful is that the content and the services have to be secure. You know, there has to be an element of trust. You know, Brian, I think you mentioned earlier the Uber and the Lyft projects, and those have had some degrees of success, but there's still an element of like not trusting the driver. And that's why, you know, we have to look at stakeholders and providers that, you know, would be a trusted support and advocate for older adults. In terms of technology, you know, one of the key things that we found over and over again, older adults will use technology. Some of the pushback we've gotten from, let's say, the electronics industry and other retail consumer goods is that they don't want to create, you know, another product or simplified, dumbed-down version of the product, and that's not what's needed. What's needed is personalization. You know, when I talked about the Echo and the Alexa project, it wasn't that, I mean, that's not a hard product to use, but what was really key to the adoption was the personalization. So it doesn't have to be dumbed down, it has to be personalized to support that individual. It's really clear, and this is not just for older adults, but if we look at technology, this idea of a frictionless interface where, you know, somebody can talk to the device. It can be natural language. That's going to be really, really important, and not just for this age group. You know, that's just becoming an industry standard. And what's really, really critical is scalability, being something on a platform that is going to be able to extend it out in a way that's cost-effective beyond just an individual, you know, small pilot. You know, some of the things that we are now talking to different industries about, when I talked about the Jersey Post, one of the ideas that we've had going forward is look at who has that connection with the household today. With the Post, it's obviously a person, but what if we were working with another telecommunications or utility vendor like a Comcast or like an Affinity here in the U.S.? They have a wire into the house. And what are the potentials to be creating services, virtual services, like a virtual town square that has community-based content and resources that could reach individuals into their home. You know, so what are some of the private partnerships that we could involve utility companies like that with? Another aspect is education, and particularly in Japan, we talked to a number of organizations that are looking at retooling the education system in Japan and creating communities so that you know, so much of the university structure is so targeted to the 18 to 24 cohort. What if you were to develop and use those facilities to support older adults for new curriculums and skill trainings? Also, there's a number of different initiatives, you know, around housing. How can we look at, within communities, providing housing that is intergenerational and pairing, let's say, students with older adults, or, you know, having, you know, people in a situation where they don't have to leave their communities and they're not necessarily, unless they want to, opting to go into a retirement community. I think it's been really effective to keep people, older adults, with younger generations. And I talked a lot about, you know, increasing mobility with self-driving vehicles. I have to tell you, when I first started doing the focus group work with retirement communities, we really wondered how people were going to react to self-driving vehicles. And I've got to tell you, I sincerely think that these are going to be the first adopters. The risk to reward ratio is so in their benefit. They were like, you know, literally, how soon can you get a vehicle like Ollie, you know, to our community? You know, so as we look, you know, in our guidance, you know, within IBM to our own, you know, business units as well as to, you know, people outside, is to, in a couple of different areas, Think about as employers, retirement, I think this is something that's going to be huge. And I think as the cohort grows bigger, every organization needs to really think about workplace policies and think about ways that they can tap into the knowledge and expertise that that generation has in a way that is supportive to their business goals, but also a way to kind of keep older people engaged in the workforce for longer. If our life expectancy is going to be 90, by mid-century, it doesn't make sense to retire at 60 or 65 and spend a third of your life in retirement. That model just isn't going to survive. I think the other big action, from a health perspective, from a government perspective, is to really look at, creating a loneliness screener that is standardized. And then also looking at using AI in new ways to aggregate data and to connect organizations more effectively and to match needs and requirements with individuals and resources in the community. Really also, this is another aspect of my work where we look at consumer goods, retail, and electronics, and the media. And, I've been looking at these numbers now for a long time, and I really kind of want to say to consumer goods companies, what is your senior market strategy? Because this is going to be a very large, relatively, not every part of the cohort, but a lot of money in the U.S. and Western Europe is controlled by people over 50. And you think you're leaving literally money on the table by not addressing older adult segment, and you're also, at a risk of alienating customers. A lot of older adults, especially the baby boomer generation, now entering into, or aging, they've been very loyal customers. And I kind of want to say, do you want to lose that loyal customer base, and just replace it with millennials, which is a very risky strategy. So, it also involves that aspect of society and that aspect of industry to kind of take a look and say, you need to look at older adults as consumers, as a target, as an audience that you want to build, and you want to extend your services and products to them as well. And with that, would love to talk more. I can talk about this for quite a long time. So if there's any other questions, would love to chat.
Thank you so much, Sheila. We have a ton of discussion that's been happening in the chat. So Sarah and I will take turns asking questions out of there. So earlier on, someone asked, are there any programs for the elderly that are blind?
There are specific, I would say there are. Though I'll be honest with you, I've done work with both agencies that specifically focus on supporting people with vision loss as well as older adults. And while there are specific, issues as people get older, there's just a lot of shared issues with this community. Especially I'll pick on transportation as one, where when we were working on the OLLI project, that was a huge community that we were interested in and getting their feedback on. And basically having multimodal communication, for example, was critically important to people that had vision and both hearing loss. And one of the things with older adults is you find as we get older, we tend to acquire more than one disability. So after the age of 40, everybody, I've got all kinds of fun statistics to share with you, but our hearing starts to decline, our vision starts to decline. And by the time we're in our 60s, we usually have 2 or more disabilities. So what we found with older adults actually was that the requirements that we got from that community really were fantastic because it gave us a picture of, the technology has to be adaptive and it has to be personalized to what's being experienced.
Great, thank you, Sheila. We've also had quite a few comments about the idea of the intergenerational programs. And the question was, have those programs been successful? Are there any examples where younger generations are interacting with older adults with benefits for both groups?
Yeah, there's one in particular in the Netherlands that is based out of a university, and it pairs students with older adults. And it really, really has been effective. Basically, the students get free room and board, And the older adults get the companionship and the support of the younger generation. And it really has flourished, and I think it's a model that should be looked at more carefully over in other countries, and not just from a student perspective too. I think there's it really has shown that there is a lot of gain just having somebody literally in the house, but more the engagement, the talking, the shared wisdom. The older adults are getting the companionship, but the younger students are also getting some perspective, some wisdom, some guidance that they wouldn't be getting necessarily if they were living in a dorm.
Great. Okay, I'm going to condense this next question a little bit. How would we go about working with communities that don't primarily speak English and are immigrants? Have any of the projects you listed today worked with these populations, or were they primarily with English-speaking individuals? Also, there's a bit of a note about how older members might feel hesitant to participate in these types of projects.
So the first, in terms of the people that aren't English speaking, yes, and I'll point to Austin as the example there, which has clearly a large Spanish speaking population. And I think in the slides too, I did include links to more information on each of those case studies. But Teresa Ferguson, who's the executive director of Austin Hub, speaks really passionately about that in terms of the range of support services that are needed for older adults and the things that you need to be very cognizant of. And they range from language and cultural background and heritage, from socioeconomic factors as well, people that are living on the edge or in poverty, to people that are, quite frankly, very well off and still very, very lonely, and different aspects of sexual orientation. So she is somebody, if you're interested in pursuing that, I think speaks very eloquently to that based on her experience in Austin. We also spoke to people in Miami, again, who were developing solutions, particularly focused on the Cuban community that was centered there. And one of the solutions in the study that was cited, talked about, it really was very focused on that community's memories, because what they wanted to do was a way to help bridge the older adults that may have come over from Cuba or from other places in Latin America, and giving them an ability to transmit and share their memories with younger generations, so that it wasn't being forgotten.
Great, Sheila, thank you. There are a couple questions about some things that were mentioned. I will suggest, because we probably won't have time to go through all of the questions, Sheila's email address is listed there on the screen, so if there's anything you'd like additional information on, you can feel free to email her. Just a couple more questions, Sheila, we'll go through before we finish out today. Another question was about, are there any technologies for facilitating social connectedness specifically targeted to those with Alzheimer's or other types of dementia?
Yeah, and this is where AI really plays a role. We've been working heavily in terms of personalization and natural language processing, and looking at, for example, Ollie, the transportation vehicle. One of the things that we really made a key feature there was that we wanted to display information in a way that is the most accessible for that individual. So it might be through text, it might be through speech, but also looking at symbolic language. And as people with dementia or their memory-related diseases progress, they tend to lose language, but they can respond to symbols. So the idea is, looking at supporting somebody wherever they are in terms of their ability to be literate. The other thing too with people with memory issues is reminders. We've looked at technology in terms of how, for example, if somebody with a memory ailment is on a bus, providing them with extra support in terms of reminders, like their stop is coming up in a minute. And then maybe giving them a buzz or giving them some kind of signal to know that this is where they get off. So, absolutely. with regards to older adults and memory, is obviously, it plays a huge role. And I also wanted to answer the question Barry brought up too about older adults being reluctant. Yeah, I mean, that is still one of the challenges, is that people will not self-identify as lonely. But like I said, in the context of, let's say, some of the retirement communities, what we found was as these solutions were kind of rolled out, they're becoming kind of a first line of support, that we were the early adopters, that then became champions. And then it wasn't so much the community saying or trying to reach out to the residents, it was the residents reaching out to each other. And that really was one of the key elements of it being successful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheila. We do have several more questions, but I think we're going to have to go ahead and wrap it up for today so we have some time for our last-minute housekeeping. I want to say a big thank you, Sheila, for a wonderful presentation today. It's really been wonderful, and we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, so if everyone would stick around for just a little bit longer, I do have a few final housekeeping things to go through. I'll go ahead and stop the recording and move on to those items.